An elderly homeless man who finds a mud-caked creature stray dog. What happens next will make you cry. The biting wind seemed to mock Arthur's threadbare coat, and the rumble in his stomach was a constant, unwelcome companion. He sat hunched on the curb, tears tracing paths through the grime on his cheeks. 68 years old, and this was what it had come to, begging for scraps outside a bakery. His life reduced to a desperate scramble for survival. He'd once had a name, a family, a home with a crackling fireplace and the aroma of his wife's pot roast filling the air. Now, old man or bum were the most common greetings he received. The bakery door opened, momentarily flooding the street with warmth and the tantalizing scent of fresh bread. A young couple emerged, laughing, their arms laden with pastries. Arthur held out his hand, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Spare some change, please? Anything will help." The couple barely glanced at him, their smiles fading as they hurried past. The door closed, and the warmth and the enticing smells were snatched away, leaving Arthur colder and emptier than before. He slumped back against the brick wall, despair threatening to engulf him. "What's the point?" he mumbled to himself, his voice barely audible above the city's din. "Just give up, Arthur. It's over." Just as the darkness threatened to consume him, he felt a nudge against his leg. Startled, he looked down. A dog, a scruffy, mud-caked creature with soulful brown eyes, was looking up at him with a hopeful tilt of its head. It was a small dog, maybe a terrier mix, with a patch of white fur on its chest and a tail that wagged tentatively. Arthur stared at the dog, surprised. He hadn't seen many animals on the streets, not friendly ones anyway. Most were as wary and hardened as the people. This one, though, seemed different. It sat patiently, its tail giving a hopeful thump against the pavement. Cautiously, Arthur reached out a hand. The dog flinched slightly but didn't run. He let Arthur stroke his head, a low whine escaping him as if to say, "I'm here for you." Something in Arthur's heart stirred. A feeling he hadn't experienced in what felt like an eternity. A flicker of warmth, a spark of connection. He rummaged in his pocket and found a crust of bread, saved from his meager breakfast. He broke it into smaller pieces and offered it to the dog. The dog ate eagerly, his tail wagging furiously now. As Arthur watched the dog eat, a strange sense of peace settled over him. He wasn't alone. This creature, this stray, had chosen to stay with him. "Well, aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" Arthur said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Guess we're in the same boat, huh?" The dog, as if understanding, licked Arthur's hand. In that simple gesture, a bond was formed, a silent pact between two lost souls seeking solace in each other's company. Arthur, for the first time in a long time, felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone anymore. He had a friend. He looked at the dog, considering. "Hope," he said softly. "That's what I'll call you. Hope." And with that, Arthur and Hope, two unlikely companions, began their journey together, facing the uncertain future with a newfound sense of purpose and the comforting knowledge that they had each other. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city streets. Arthur, with Hope curled up beside him, felt a familiar pang of anxiety. Nightfall brought a new set of dangers, a heightened vulnerability that made him uneasy. He needed to find a safe place to sleep, a sheltered corner where he and Hope could rest undisturbed. He knew of an alleyway a few blocks away, tucked behind a row of abandoned shops. It wasn't much, but the overhang provided some protection from the elements, and the relative seclusion offered a sense of security. As they walked, Arthur couldn't help but smile at Hope trotting beside him. The dog's initial wariness had vanished, replaced by an almost eager loyalty. Hope seemed to sense Arthur's moods, offering a comforting nudge or a playful lick whenever his spirits faltered. Reaching the alleyway, Arthur settled against the wall, pulling his thin blanket tighter around him. Hope snuggled close, his warm fur a welcome comfort against the encroaching chill. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled bag. It contained half a sandwich he'd managed to scavenge earlier that day. He hesitated, He was hungry, his stomach gnawing with an insistence that was hard to ignore. But Hope hadn't eaten since the crust of bread that morning. With a sigh, Arthur tore the sandwich in half, offering one piece to Hope. The dog devoured it in a matter of seconds, his tail wagging appreciatively. Arthur smiled. "Don't worry, boy," he said softly. "We'll find more tomorrow. We'll always share what we have." As he ate his meager portion, Arthur's thoughts drifted back to his past. He remembered the Sunday dinners with his family, the laughter, the overflowing plates, the warmth of belonging. He closed his eyes, the memories both a comfort and a source of aching loss. He thought of his wife, Mary, her gentle smile and her infectious laugh. He thought of his daughter, Emily, her bright eyes and her boundless energy. He hadn't seen them in years, not since everything fell apart. The details were a blur now, a haze of bad decisions and unfortunate circumstances. He'd lost his job, then his house, and finally his family. Shame and despair had driven him to the streets, where he'd become another invisible face in the crowd, another forgotten soul lost in the city's vastness. But now, with Hope by his side, something had shifted. He felt a spark of responsibility, a reason to keep going. He had to take care of Hope, to protect him from the harsh realities of their life. As the night deepened, Arthur drifted off to sleep, Hope's steady breathing a soothing lullaby. He dreamt of a warm house, a crackling fire, and the smell of Mary's cooking. In his dream, Emily was a little girl again, her laughter echoing through the house as she chased Hope around the living room. He woke with a start, the dream fading like mist in the morning sun. For a moment, he felt a pang of disappointment, a longing for the life he'd lost. But then he looked at Hope, curled up beside him, his eyes filled with trust and affection. And Arthur knew he wasn't alone. He had Hope, and that was enough. For now, at least, it was enough. The morning sun, filtering through the gaps in the buildings, brought little warmth to the alleyway. Arthur woke with a shiver, his joints stiff and aching. Hope, sensing his discomfort, nudged closer, his warm body a comforting presence. "Morning, boy," Arthur mumbled, scratching Hope behind the ears. Time to face the day. Their routine was simple, dictated by necessity. First, a search for food, then a wander through the city, hoping for a kind soul to spare some change. Sometimes they would find a quiet spot in a park, where Arthur could sit and watch the world go by, Hope dozing contentedly at his feet. Today, their search for food led them to a bustling farmer's market. The air was filled with the enticing aromas of fresh produce, baked goods, and sizzling street food. Arthur's stomach growled in protest, but he kept his gaze averted, focusing on the ground. He knew better than to beg from these people. They were too busy, too preoccupied with their own lives to spare a thought for a homeless old man and his dog. As they shuffled past a stall overflowing with colorful fruits, a voice stopped them. "Excuse me, sir?" Arthur looked up, startled. A young woman with a kind face and a bright smile was looking at him. "Would your dog like a treat?" she asked, holding out a piece of dried apple. Hope's tail wagged excitedly. Arthur hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Go on, boy," the woman encouraged. "It's good for you." Hope took the treat gently from her hand, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," Arthur mumbled, surprised by the woman's generosity. "You're welcome," she replied. "He's a lovely dog. What's his name?" "Hope," Arthur said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Hope," the woman repeated, her smile widening. "That's a beautiful name." She turned to a basket filled with apples. "Would you like one too?" she offered. "They're fresh from our orchard." Arthur's eyes widened. He hadn't had a fresh apple he couldn't remember how long. "Thank you," he said, accepting the apple with a trembling hand. "You're very kind." "Not at all," the woman said. "We all need a little help sometimes." As Arthur and Hope walked away, munching on their apples, Arthur felt a warmth spread through him. It wasn't just the food. It was the woman's kindness, her simple act of generosity that had touched him deeply. He thought about her words, "We all need a little help sometimes." He'd spent so long believing he was alone, that no one cared. But maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world, people who were willing to offer a helping hand. Later that day, as they rested in a small park, Arthur's thoughts drifted back to his past. He remembered the day he met Mary, her laughter echoing through the library as she searched for a book. He remembered the joy of holding Emily for the first time, her tiny hand gripping his finger. He also remembered the day he lost his job, the shame and the fear that had consumed him. He remembered the arguments with Mary, the growing distance between them, the finality of her leaving. He closed his eyes, the memories a bittersweet ache in his heart. He'd made mistakes, he knew that, but he'd also loved deeply, and he'd lost everything. Hope, sensing his sadness, rested his head on Arthur's lap, his brown eyes filled with concern. Arthur stroked his fur, a silent promise to keep going, to keep fighting for a better future. He had hope now, and that was a start. Maybe, just maybe, it was a chance to rebuild, to find redemption, to find his way back to the life he'd lost. Days turned into weeks, and Arthur and Hope settled into a routine of sorts. They navigated the city streets with a familiarity born of necessity, knowing where to find the best discarded food, the quietest parks, and the safest shelters. Their bond deepened with each passing day, a silent understanding forged in shared hardship and unwavering loyalty. One crisp autumn afternoon, as they were making their way through a crowded plaza, Arthur froze. A melody drifted from a nearby cafe, a familiar tune that sent a jolt of recognition through him. It was a song he and Mary used to dance to, a song that held a lifetime of memories. He closed his eyes, the music transporting him back to a time of joy and laughter, a time before the darkness had crept in. He could almost feel Mary's hand in his, her head resting on his shoulder as they swayed to the music. He opened his eyes, the present crashing back into focus. The plaza was bustling with people, their faces a blur of indifference. He felt a pang of loneliness, a yearning for the life he'd lost. Hope, sensing his distress, nudged his hand, his brown eyes filled with concern. Arthur knelt down, burying his face in Hope's fur. "It's all right, boy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Just a memory." But the memory lingered, a ghost from the past that refused to be silenced. It reminded him of everything he'd lost, everything he could never get back. That night, as they huddled together in their usual alleyway, Arthur couldn't shake the feeling of despair. He tossed and turned, the memories haunting his dreams. He saw Mary's face, her eyes filled with disappointment and sadness. He heard Emily's voice, calling out for him, her cries echoing in the emptiness. He woke with a start, his heart pounding. He looked at Hope, sleeping peacefully beside him, and a wave of shame washed over him. He was letting the past consume him, letting his regrets define him. He had to let go to move forward, for Hope's sake as much as his own. The next morning, they ventured out with a renewed sense of purpose. Arthur held his head high, his gaze steady. He wouldn't let the shadows of the past dictate his future. He had hope, and that was enough. As they walked, Arthur noticed a flyer taped to a lamppost. It advertised a free clinic for homeless people and their pets. He paused, intrigued. He hadn't seen a doctor in years, and he knew Hope could benefit from a checkup. He tore off the flyer and studied it carefully. The clinic was being held at a local community center, just a few blocks away. He looked at Hope, who wagged his tail in anticipation. "What do you think, boy?" Arthur asked. "Ready for a little pampering?" Hope barked happily in response. With a newfound sense of hope, Arthur and Hope headed towards the community center, ready to face whatever the future held. Together, the community center bustled with activity. Volunteers in brightly colored vests moved amongst the crowd, offering food, clothing, and medical assistance. Arthur, feeling overwhelmed by the noise and the sheer number of people, hesitated at the entrance. He was used to the anonymity of the streets, the invisibility that came with being homeless. Here he felt exposed, vulnerable. Hope, sensing his apprehension, nudged his hand, his tail wagging encouragingly. Arthur took a deep breath and stepped inside. A friendly volunteer, noticing his hesitation, approached him with a warm smile. "Welcome, sir," she said. "Is this your first time at the clinic?" Arthur nodded, his voice catching in his throat. "Don't worry," the volunteer reassured him. "We're here to help. Do you need anything? Food, clothing, medical attention?" I saw the flyer about the pet clinic," Arthur stammered, gesturing towards Hope. "I was hoping he could get a checkup." "Of course," the volunteer exclaimed. "Right this way. We have some wonderful vets volunteering today." She led them to a makeshift examination area where a kind-faced veterinarian was waiting. Hope, initially wary of the unfamiliar surroundings, quickly warmed up to the vet's gentle touch. After a thorough examination, the vet pronounced Hope in good health, aside from some minor malnutrition. She provided Arthur with some vitamins and dietary advice, along with a new collar and leash. "He's a lucky dog," the vet said, smiling at Arthur. "He's got someone who cares for him." Arthur's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and gratitude. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear those words, to be acknowledged as someone who cared, someone who mattered. As they were leaving the clinic, another volunteer approached Arthur. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "I couldn't help but notice your dog. He's a real beauty." Arthur nodded, surprised by the compliment. "I work at a local animal shelter," the volunteer continued. "We're always looking for responsible people to foster dogs. Would you be interested?" Arthur hesitated. He was homeless, living on the streets. How could he possibly foster a dog? I don't have a home," he confessed, shame creeping into his voice. "I understand," the volunteer said kindly, "but we have a program that provides temporary housing for foster families. It's not much, but it's a roof over your head and a warm bed. And you'd be doing a wonderful thing for these animals." Arthur looked at Hope, who was gazing up at him with trusting eyes. He thought about the kindness he'd received at the clinic, the sense of community he'd felt. Maybe this was a chance to rebuild his life, to find a purpose beyond mere survival. "I'll do it," he said, his voice firm with newfound resolve. The volunteer beamed. "Wonderful. I know you'll make a great foster dad." As Arthur and Hope left the community center, a sense of hope filled Arthur's heart. He had a chance to make a difference, to give back to the community that had shown him kindness. And maybe, just maybe, this was the first step towards a new life, a life filled with purpose and belonging. The transition from the streets to a small, sparsely furnished apartment was jarring. The silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator, felt strange after the constant cacophony of the city. The bed, though lumpy and worn, was a luxury Arthur hadn't experienced in years. He spent the first night tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling that this was all a dream, that he would wake up back in the cold, harsh reality of the alleyway. Hope, however, seemed to thrive in the new environment. He explored every corner of the apartment with enthusiastic curiosity, his tail wagging incessantly. He had a real bed now, a soft, worn rug in the corner. He no longer had to compete with other strays for scraps, and the constant threat of danger seemed to fade away. The animal shelter provided Arthur with food and supplies for Hope, as well as a small stipend to cover his basic needs. He was assigned a caseworker, a kind woman named Sarah, who visited regularly to check on his progress and offer support. "This is a great opportunity for you, Arthur," Sarah had said during her first visit. "Use this time to get back on your feet, to find some stability." Arthur nodded, determined to make the most of this second chance. He started attending support groups for recovering homeless individuals, and he even volunteered at a local soup kitchen, eager to give back to the community that had helped him. But despite his efforts, the past continued to haunt him. The memories of his lost family, his failed career, and his descent into homelessness weighed heavily on his mind. He struggled with feelings of guilt and shame, questioning whether he deserved this newfound stability. One evening, as he sat alone in the apartment, the silence became unbearable. He picked up the phone, his finger hovering over the buttons. He hadn't spoken to Emily in years. He didn't even know if she would remember him, if she would want to speak to him. He closed his eyes, picturing her face, her bright smile. He longed to hear her voice, to tell her he was sorry, to ask for her forgiveness. But the fear held him back. What if she rejected him? What if she blamed him for everything? He couldn't bear the thought of adding more pain to her life. With a sigh, he put the phone down. He wasn't ready yet. He needed to find some peace within himself before he could reach out to his daughter. Just then, Hope nudged his hand, his brown eyes filled with concern. Arthur knelt down, burying his face in Hope's fur. "It's all right, boy," he whispered.
I'm all right.
But as he held Hope close, he knew he had a long way to go. The road to redemption was paved with challenges, and he would need all the strength he could muster to face them. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Arthur threw himself into his new role as a foster carer, welcoming a steady stream of dogs into his small apartment. He cared for them with a tenderness born of his own experiences, providing them with the love and security they craved. He walked them in the nearby park, played fetch in the small courtyard, and spent hours grooming their fur and whispering words of encouragement. Hope, initially wary of these temporary house guests, soon adapted to his role as elder statesman, welcoming each newcomer with a gentle sniff and a playful nudge. He seemed to understand their anxieties, their fear of abandonment, and he offered them comfort and companionship. Arthur, in turn, found solace in caring for these animals. They provided him with a sense of purpose, a reason to get up each morning. He felt a renewed sense of self-worth, a belief that he could still make a difference in the world, even if it was just one dog at a time. One afternoon, as he was walking a particularly timid terrier in the park, he noticed a familiar figure sitting on a bench. It was a woman, her hair streaked with gray, her face etched with the lines of time and worry. She was watching him with an expression of intense concentration, her eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and recognition. Arthur's heart pounded in his chest. He knew that face, those eyes. It was Emily, his daughter. He froze, unsure how to react. Years of guilt and regret flooded his mind, paralyzing him. He wanted to run, to hide, to disappear into the anonymity of the city. But something held him back, a desperate longing to bridge the chasm that had separated them for so long. Taking a deep breath, he walked towards her, his steps slow and hesitant. As he approached, Emily rose from the bench, her eyes fixed on his. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Emily," he replied, his voice cracking. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotions. Years of hurt, anger, and longing swirled between them, creating an invisible barrier. Emily took a step forward, her eyes searching his face. "Is it really you?" Arthur nodded, unable to speak. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. I thought I'd lost you forever." She rushed into his arms, and he held her close, burying his face in her hair. He felt her tears on his cheek, and his own tears flowed freely. "I'm so sorry, Emily," he choked out. "I'm so sorry for everything." "It's okay, Dad," she sobbed. "You're here now. That's all that matters." They stood there for a long time, clinging to each other, the years of separation melting away. The timid terrier, sensing the emotional intensity of the moment, sat patiently at their feet, a silent witness to their reunion. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Arthur knew that his life had taken an unexpected turn. He had found his daughter, and with her, a chance to heal the wounds of the past. The road ahead would still be challenging, but he no longer had to face it alone. He had Emily, he had Hope, and he had a renewed sense of hope for the future. The reunion with Emily brought a mix of joy and trepidation into Arthur's life. He was overjoyed to have his daughter back in his life, but the years of separation had left a deep chasm between them, filled with unspoken words and unresolved pain. Emily, now a grown woman with a family of her own, was eager to reconnect with her father. She visited him regularly at his small apartment, bringing her 2 young children, who quickly became enamored with Hope and the revolving door of foster dogs. The apartment, once filled with silence and loneliness, now echoed with the sounds of laughter and playful chatter. But beneath the surface of this newfound happiness, a current of tension ran. Emily struggled to understand how her father had ended up on the streets, how he had allowed their family to fall apart. Arthur, in turn, wrestled with guilt and shame, unable to fully explain the circumstances that had led to his downfall. One evening, as they sat together in the apartment, Emily finally broached the subject. "Dad," she began hesitantly, "I need to understand what happened. Why did you leave? Why didn't you contact us?" Arthur looked at her, his eyes filled with pain. "It's a long story, Emily," he said quietly. "I have time," she replied softly. And so Arthur began to unravel the tangled threads of his past. He spoke of the job loss, the financial struggles, the mounting despair that had consumed him. He spoke of his pride, his inability to ask for help, his fear of burdening his family with his problems. He spoke of the night he left, the note he'd left on the kitchen table, the tears he'd shed as he walked away from the only home he'd ever known. He spoke of the years he'd spent on the streets, the loneliness, the despair, the constant struggle for survival. He spoke of Hope, the stray dog who had become his unlikely savior, the creature who had given him a reason to keep going. As he spoke, Emily listened intently, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. She had her own memories of that time, the confusion, the fear, the overwhelming sense of abandonment. When he finished, a long silence hung in the air. Emily reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. "I didn't understand, Dad," she said softly. "I thought you didn't want us anymore." "That's not true, Emily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I loved you and your mother more than anything. But I was lost, I was broken. I didn't know how to come back." "It's okay, Dad," she said, squeezing his hand. "We're here now. We can start over." Arthur looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. He had been given a second chance, a chance to rebuild his relationship with his daughter, a chance to heal the wounds of the past. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be more difficult conversations, more painful memories to confront. But with Emily by his side, he felt a renewed sense of hope, a belief that they could overcome the challenges that lay ahead. Life took on a new rhythm for Arthur. His days were no longer defined by survival but by purpose and connection. He continued to foster dogs, but now with Emily's help, the task felt less daunting. Her children, young Tommy and little Lily, brought an infectious energy to the apartment, their laughter chasing away the lingering shadows of the past. Emily, with her husband's support, helped Arthur find a small, subsidized apartment in a safer neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it had a small balcony where Arthur could sit with Hope and watch the world go by. He even started growing a few herbs in pots, a small touch of nature in the urban jungle. The community center that had offered him the initial lifeline continued to be a source of support. Arthur became a regular volunteer at the soup kitchen, his experiences giving him a unique empathy for those struggling with homelessness. He found a quiet satisfaction in offering a warm meal and a kind word to those who felt lost and forgotten. He also reconnected with his faith, attending services at a small church near his new apartment. The sense of community, the shared prayers, and the uplifting hymns filled a void he hadn't realized existed. He found comfort in the familiar rituals, the sense of belonging, and the unwavering belief in a higher power. One Sunday, after service, the pastor approached Arthur. "Arthur," he said, "I've been so impressed with your dedication to helping others. We have a position opening up here at the church part-time, helping with outreach programs. Would you be interested?" Arthur was taken aback. A job? At the church? He hadn't held a steady job in years. I don't know, Pastor," he stammered. "I'm not sure I'm qualified." "Nonsense, Arthur," the pastor replied with a smile. "You have a heart for service, and that's what matters most. Think about it." Arthur did think about it long and hard. He spoke to Emily, who was overjoyed at the prospect. "Dad, this is amazing," she exclaimed. "You'd be perfect for it." With Emily's encouragement, Arthur accepted the position. He found a renewed sense of purpose in his work, connecting with people in need, offering support and guidance. He organized clothing drives, coordinated food deliveries, and even started a small program to help homeless individuals find temporary housing and job training. His life had come full circle. He had gone from being a recipient of charity to a beacon of hope for others. He had found redemption, not just for himself, but for those who were still struggling to find their way. And through it all, hope remained his constant companion, his furry confidant. They walked together, they prayed together, they shared the quiet moments of contentment that life now offered. Hope, the stray dog who had found him in his darkest hour, had become a symbol of his transformation, a reminder that even in the depths of despair, hope can blossom. Years passed, and Arthur settled into a life of quiet contentment. He found joy in the simple things: a warm cup of coffee on a sunny morning, a walk in the park with Hope, an evening spent with Emily and her family. He had rebuilt his life, piece by piece, with the help of his daughter, his faith, and the unwavering companionship of his canine friend. His work at the church became his passion. He was known throughout the community for his kindness, his compassion, and his unwavering dedication to helping those in need. He had become a beacon of hope, a living testament to the power of redemption and second chances. But time, as it always does, marched on. Arthur's hair turned silver, his steps slowed, and his once strong hands began to tremble. Hope, too, showed the signs of age. His muzzle grayed, his gait became less steady, and his naps grew longer and more frequent. Arthur knew that their time together was drawing to a close. He cherished every moment, every walk, every shared glance, every gentle nuzzle. He had learned to appreciate the preciousness of life, the fragility of time, and the enduring power of love. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Arthur sat on his balcony with Hope by his side, he felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He looked at Hope, his old friend, his faithful companion. Hope's eyes, once bright and full of life, were now clouded with age. He rested his head on Arthur's lap, his breathing shallow and labored. Arthur knew this was the end. He stroked Hope's fur, whispering words of love and gratitude. He thanked him for his loyalty, his companionship, his unwavering belief in him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, Hope took his last breath. Arthur held him close, his tears falling freely. He had lost his best friend, his confidant, the creature who had saved him from despair. But even in his grief, Arthur felt a sense of peace. He knew that Hope's life had been full of love and purpose. He had brought joy to countless people, both human and canine. He had taught Arthur the true meaning of companionship, loyalty, and unconditional love. In the days that followed, Arthur was surrounded by the love and support of his daughter and her family. They shared stories of Hope, his playful antics, his gentle nature, his unwavering loyalty. They laughed and cried together, celebrating the life of this extraordinary dog who had touched their hearts. Arthur scattered Hope's ashes in the park where they had first met, a place filled with memories of their shared journey. He planted a small tree in his memory, a symbol of the enduring bond they had shared. Life went on, but it was never the same without Hope. Arthur continued his work at the church, his dedication to helping others undiminished. He found solace in his faith, his family, and the memories of his beloved dog. One day, as he was walking through the park, he noticed a young boy sitting on a bench, tears streaming down his face. A small, scruffy dog sat beside him, whimpering softly. Arthur approached the boy cautiously. "Are you all right, son?" he asked gently. The boy looked up, his eyes filled with sadness. "My dog. He's lost," he sobbed. Arthur knelt down, his heart aching for the boy's distress. He knew the pain of loss, the emptiness that followed. "I know how you feel," he said softly. "I lost my best friend a while ago." He told the boy about hope, their shared journey, the love and loyalty they had shared. He spoke of the importance of cherishing the memories, of finding comfort in the love that had been given. As Arthur spoke, the boy's tears subsided. He looked at his own dog, a newfound appreciation in his eyes. Arthur smiled. He knew that Hope's legacy lived on, in the hearts of those he had touched, in the kindness and compassion he had inspired. And in that moment, Arthur felt a renewed sense of hope, a belief that even in the face of loss, love endures.